The Atlantic Ocean, 1943. A vast, unforgiving expanse where the very fate of nations hung precariously in the balance. For 4 long years, German U-boats, the infamous Grey Wolves of Admiral Karl Dönitz, had stalked these waters, a terrifying menace that threatened to sever the vital lifeline between North America and Great Britain. Picture the sheer dread that gripped the hearts of sailors and strategists alike. Winston Churchill, a man who had faced down tyranny and survived the Blitz, later confessed that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entirety of the Second World War. That statement alone should paint a stark picture of the existential threat these submarines posed. Imagine the situation. Convoys laden with desperately needed food, fuel, and war materiel, moving at a snail's pace, their movements meticulously tracked by Dönitz's intelligence. Then, without warning, a torpedo streaking through the water, followed by the terrifying explosion that ripped apart a merchant ship, sending thousands of tons of cargo and hundreds of lives to the icy depths. The German U-boat arm had perfected its wolf-pack tactics, overwhelming convoy escorts with sheer numbers, sinking ships faster than the Allies could possibly replace them. In March 1943 alone, over 80 Allied ships, totaling nearly 500,000 tons, were sent to the bottom. April saw this surge to an horrifying 600,000 tons. The arithmetic was chillingly simple, yet devastatingly effective. If Germany could sink more tonnage than the Allies could build, victory would inevitably follow. Conversely, if the Allies lost submarines faster than they could replace them, defeat was a certainty. And in early 1943, the numbers seemed to favor Germany unequivocally. 20 new U-boats were joining the Kriegsmarine every month, while losses rarely exceeded 10. Dönitz, from his headquarters in France, commanded over 400 submarines, a force that had brought Britain to the brink of starvation, choking off the very arteries of its survival. This was a crisis of monumental proportions, a silent war fought in the depths, with the future of the free world hanging by a thread. The question wasn't if. The Atlantic lifeline would be severed, but when. But then, an extraordinary transformation began. A quiet revolution, conceived in the war rooms and shipyards of America, was about to unleash a counterforce that would shatter the myth of U-boat invincibility and flip the entire dynamic of the Battle of the Atlantic on its head. The Germans, once the hunters, were about to become the hunted, caught in a trap that they didn't even know was being sprung. On March 5, 1943, at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, a new breed of naval warfare was quietly preparing to sail into the Atlantic. This wasn't just another convoy escort. This was something fundamentally different, a radical reimagining of anti-submarine warfare. Captain Giles Short, commanding officer of the USS Bogue, an unassuming escort carrier, reviewed an encrypted message. The intelligence, obtained through Ultra, the top-secret decryption of German naval transmissions, revealed something staggering: the precise positions of multiple U-boat refueling rendezvous points. This wasn't just about finding a U-boat, it was about disrupting their entire operational network. Milk cow submarines like U-459 and U-487, the vital lifeblood of the wolf packs, were scheduled to resupply the very boats that terrorized the Atlantic. The call went out. One escort carrier, supported by 4 destroyer escorts, the USS Bogue, USS Belknap, USS Georgie Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson, would form the spearhead of a new, aggressive strategy. Their mission? to hunt the hunters. What none of these men knew at that moment was that this single deployment would trigger the most catastrophic reversal in submarine warfare history. Within 8 months, these American hunter-killer groups would dismantle Donitz's entire Atlantic U-boat fleet, forcing a withdrawal that effectively ended the German submarine threat. Let's understand why this was such a profound shift. Traditional convoy escorts were inherently reactive. Their primary, indeed their only mission, was to protect the merchant ships under their charge. If a U-boat attacked, the escort had a terrible choice: pursue the submarine, potentially leaving the rest of the convoy vulnerable, or stay with the convoy and hope the submarine didn't strike again. It was a defensive posture, a game of whack-a-mole where the U-boat always held the initiative. The hunter-killer concept, however, shattered this paradigm. These groups had no such constraints. Their merchant ships were themselves. Their sole mission was offensive: to find and destroy U-boats wherever they operated, whenever they surfaced, even in the most remote corners of the Atlantic. This was a psychological, tactical, and technological declaration of war against the U-boat arm itself. The core of this revolution lay in a combination of factors: purpose-built platforms, highly skilled personnel, and, most critically, a suite of advanced technologies that the Germans simply didn't possess or even fully comprehend. The USS Bogue, a seemingly modest vessel displacing 9,800 tons with a crew of 890, was not just a flight deck. It was a mobile, integrated anti-submarine warfare platform. Her 495-foot flight deck launched F-4F Wildcat fighters for air cover and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, specifically adapted for anti-submarine duties. But the true game changers were the technologies carried within her hull and her aircraft. First, there was a centimeter wavelength radar. While the Germans had radar, their systems operated on longer wavelengths, which were far more susceptible to detection by Allied receivers, and also struggled with accurate targeting. The American centimeter band radar was effectively invisible to German detection equipment of the time. This meant an Avenger could detect a surfaced U-boat from 18 miles away in the dark, or through heavy weather, while the U-boat's bridge watch had no idea they were being observed until the aircraft was almost directly overhead. This erased the U-boat's most fundamental advantage: stealth on the surface. No longer could they recharge their batteries or transit with impunity under the cloak of darkness or fog. Second, high-frequency direction finding gear, affectionately known as Huff Duff. German submarine doctrine, developed by Dönitz, required frequent radio communication. Position reports every 24 hours, immediate contact reports upon sighting convoys, weather observations twice daily, damage assessments after attacks. Each transmission, lasting only seconds, was a potential death sentence. Huff Duff stations on Allied ships and shore bases could triangulate these fleeting radio transmissions with devastating accuracy. A U-boat commander might think a quick burst transmission was untraceable, but Allied intelligence could pinpoint their location within a 2-mile radius. This created an impossible dilemma for Dönitz's captains: maintain radio silence and lose crucial tactical coordination with the wolf pack, or transmit and reveal their position to an unseen, relentless enemy. And then, carried in the bomb bays of those Avenger torpedo bombers, was a secret weapon so ingenious and terrifying that it was designated merely as the Mark 24 mine to disguise its true nature: the Fido acoustic homing torpedo. This wasn't a traditional torpedo that ran in a straight line. The Fido would be dropped into the water, and once submerged, it would listen for the distinctive sounds of a U-boat's propellers. Upon detecting them, it would home in, following the sound signature directly to its prey. This meant a U-boat could crash dive and try to evade, but the torpedo, with a terrifying intelligence of its own, would relentlessly pursue, even at shallow depths. For a U-boat crew, it was like being stalked by an unseen predator within their own element, the ocean itself becoming a source of terror. These technological marvels were integrated into a sophisticated, scientifically developed doctrine. Operational research scientists meticulously calculated optimal search patterns to maximize radar coverage. Aircraft patrol schedules were timed precisely to catch surfaced submarines in their most vulnerable moments. Attack protocols were designed not just to drop depth charges, but to maintain continuous pressure, exhausting the U-boat's batteries and compressed air reserves, forcing it to the surface where it could be finished off. This wasn't intuition. It was a calculated science of destruction. And perhaps the most crucial, yet entirely invisible advantage was ultra-intelligence. While the Germans believed their Enigma encryption system remained secure, they were tragically wrong. In October 1942, the U-559 was captured, and, along with it, crucial code books fell into British hands. Cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park, the unsung heroes of the war, had subsequently broken the four-rotor M4 cipher. This meant that every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines, every position report, every tactical instruction was being read by Allied intelligence within hours of transmission, often even before. The U-boat crews themselves had fully understood their new orders. This intelligence fed directly into the hunter-killer groups, giving them a predictive capability that felt almost supernatural to the Germans. They didn't just know where U-boats were, they knew where they were going to be. Let's delve into some of the harrowing encounters that defined this dramatic reversal. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery, a veteran of Atlantic convoy operations and later commander of Composite Squadron 9 aboard the Bogue, understood the critical vulnerabilities of U-boats, surfacing to charge batteries, meeting supply submarines, and transmitting radio reports. These were the moments the hunter-killers exploited with ruthless efficiency. Take the case of U-569. On May 22, 1943, after 7 weeks at sea, its fuel reserves critically low, U-569, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hans Johansen, was directed to rendezvous with the milk cow U-459. It was a routine operation, essential for extending the U-boat's patrol range. At 14:20 hours, Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain detected U-569 on radar, surfaced, and charging batteries, blissfully unaware of the impending doom. Range: 18 miles. Bearing: 90 degrees relative. Chamberlain pushed his control stick forward, beginning his attack run. The bridge watch on U-569 spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles, far too late. Alarm bells screamed throughout the boat as Johansen ordered an emergency dive. A Type Seehensee U-boat, the workhorse of the German fleet, could perform a crash dive in about 35 seconds to periscope depth. Ballast tank vents opened, diesel engines stopped, electric motors engaged, and the boat angled sharply downwards as tons of seawater flooded the tanks. But Chamberlain's depth charge pattern, precisely calculated, caught U-569 at a shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges, set for shallow detonation, exploded. The damage was severe, ripping open the hull and forcing U-569 back to the surface, a crippled whale gasping for air. A second Avenger, piloted by Howard Roberts, was already there. Roberts attacked immediately, but then observed white flags appearing on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS St. Laurent was vectored to the scene. As she approached, however, Johansen, perhaps in a final act of defiance or despair, ordered his crew to scuttle the boat and abandon ship. 25 of the 44 crew members survived, pulled from the icy Atlantic. 19 went down with their boat. The capture of these survivors provided invaluable intelligence. During interrogation, German submariners expressed genuine shock. "They knew exactly where we were," one survivor stated, bewildered. "It was as if they could see through the ocean itself." This sentiment echoed across the U-boat fleet, fueling rumors of a new, undetectable Allied technology. They didn't know the true extent of Ultra's reach, that cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded their entire naval grid system, identifying patrol areas, wolf-pack assembly points, and supply rendezvous coordinates. Every U-boat at sea was potentially compromised, operating in a world where its every move was, unbeknownst to it, being observed. The destruction of the milk cows proved particularly catastrophic. These specialized supply submarines, designed to refuel and rearm operational U-boats far out in the Atlantic, were the logistical backbone of Dönitz's long-range operations. Without them, Type 7C boats, which formed the bulk of the fleet, simply couldn't reach the American coast. Their patrol areas contracted dramatically, forcing them into the mid-Atlantic, precisely where the hunter-killer groups were now waiting in ever-growing numbers. The psychological blow was immense. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other in October 1943. This wasn't just losing a combat vessel. It was amputating the U-boat arm's ability to wage long-range warfare. One of the most dramatic and revealing encounters occurred on August 7th, 1943. Aircraft from the USS Card, commanded by Captain Arnold Buster Isbell, whose group would become one of the most successful of the war, earning the first presidential unit citation for a hunter-killer group, located the milk cow U-170, refueling U-66 on the surface. The scene was chaotic. Fuel hoses still connected, making a crash dive impossible for U-170. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth charges that straddled U-170 perfectly. The explosion was immense, igniting over 400 tons of highly flammable diesel fuel, creating a pillar of fire visible from 30 miles away. U-66, damaged by the blast, managed to crash, dive, and escape, but its commander, Kapitan Lieutenant Klaus Barkston, witnessed the destruction of the vital supply vessel from periscope depth. His war diary entry captured the profound shock and despair felt by U-boat commanders. The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted. This chilling admission marked a profound turning point. The psychological advantage, once firmly with the U-boats, had irrevocably shifted. The fear was palpable. Imagine being a young U-boat crewman, cooped up in a steel tube, deep beneath the Atlantic. The days were monotonous, punctuated by cramped quarters, the smell of diesel, and the constant thrum of machinery. But the nights, or any time on the surface, were now laced with a new, terrifying anxiety. The constant thrum of the diesel engines, once a sound of progress and power, now felt like a death knell. Every shadow, every distant drone of an engine could be an avenger, equipped with a radar that saw through the darkness, or a Fido torpedo that listened through the water. Morale reports intercepted by the Allies spoke of crews becoming increasingly reluctant to surface, even for essential battery charging or ventilation, preferring the suffocating darkness of the deep to the blinding light of an unexpected attack. Dönitz, attempting to stem the tide, ordered U-boats to transit the Bay of Biscay submerged, regardless of battery depletion. Surface refueling was restricted to darkness. Radio transmissions were reduced to an absolute minimum, but these were desperate measures, attempts to plug holes in a dam that was already crumbling under the relentless pressure of American technological and industrial superiority. The encounters grew more brutal, more desperate. On October 31st, 1943, in heavy seas and darkness, a legendary engagement unfolded. USS Card's Hunter-Killer Group was operating in the patrol area where U-405, commanded by the experienced Kapitänleutnant Ralph Heinrich Hauptmann, was operating with Wolfpack Siegfried. The destroyer USS Bory gained radar contact at 21 hours. U-405 crash-dived, but was forced back to the surface by depth charges. Unable to dive again due to damage, Hauptmann made a desperate, almost suicidal decision. He would fight on the surface with his deck guns. What followed became legendary. In the churning darkness, the two vessels collided, the Bory's bow riding up onto U-405's foredeck. For several minutes, the ships were locked together in a grotesque embrace. Crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors, in a surreal testament to the desperation, even hurled coffee mugs, shell casings, and, in one incredible instance, a sheath knife at German gunners. The combat was utterly visceral, a chaotic melee in the blackness. When the vessels finally separated, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchkins, Bory's captain, ordered all weapons to bear. Over 4,000 rounds of ammunition were expended as U-405 attempted its escape. The submarine's conning tower was riddled with holes, her deck gun destroyed, her hull punctured below the waterline. Hauptmann, seeing the futility, ordered abandon ship as U-405 settled by the stern. Only 8 of the 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Hauptmann was not among them. The Bory herself was mortally damaged in the encounter and scuttled the next day. This engagement, horrific in its intimacy, demonstrated that even the most experienced U-boat commanders, pushed to the absolute edge, could no longer survive against determined hunter-killer attacks. The sheer ferocity of these battles, a stark contrast to the distant, impersonal torpedo attacks of earlier years, underscores the profound psychological shift for the U-boat crews. They were no longer unseen predators. They were cornered prey, fighting for their lives with bare hands in some cases. The technological revolution fueling the hunter-killer success wasn't just about radar and homing torpedoes. It extended to a sophisticated, integrated system. Operations research scientists developed optimal search patterns using probability theory, turning the vast Atlantic into a grid where probabilities of detection were maximized. Acoustic analysis could distinguish individual U-boat propeller signatures, allowing specific boats to be tracked across thousands of miles. Statistical models predicted U-boat behavior based on thousands of observations, making every maneuver, every transmission, every surfacing a calculated risk. The Germans, trapped in their outdated assumptions, largely believed their Enigma encryption was unbreakable. This blind spot was their undoing. Every operational order, every seemingly insignificant weather report was being intercepted, decoded, and analyzed by Allied intelligence. When Kapitan Lieutenant Hermann Hoffmann, commander of U-172, a veteran boat that had sunk 26 ships and whose crew was considered elite, transmitted a weather report on December 13, 1943. His position was immediately betrayed by direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores. The USS Bogue's hunter-killer group was vectored to his position. The first attack came from Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler's Avenger, dropping a Fido homing torpedo. U-172's acoustic operator detected it in time to evade, but evasion required high-speed maneuvering that drained batteries rapidly. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft had arrived, establishing a relentless, continuous contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate game of survival, surfacing briefly to ventilate the boat, then crash diving when radar detected approaching aircraft. At Oro Day 8, on December 14th, batteries exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted, Hoffmann had no choice but to surface and remain surfaced. U-1 Hansamartinu's anti-aircraft guns engaged the circling aircraft, a futile gesture against overwhelming air superiority, while damage control teams attempted equally futile repairs. The surface battle lasted 43 minutes. Destroyer escorts converged, firing over 400 rounds from their main batteries. U-72's hull was penetrated in 17 locations before she finally sank. 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. 13 survivors were pulled from the water, their interrogations painting a stark picture of despair. The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide, we cannot run, we cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last. This wasn't just defeat. It was a profound, existential disillusionment. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that had nearly brought Britain to its knees was now being systematically annihilated. January saw 19 U-boats lost, February 20th, more March 23rd. The arithmetic of destruction was relentless and accelerating. The quality gap between American and German forces widened with each engagement. American pilots accumulated hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience, becoming experts in spotting, tracking, and attacking. Radar operators learned to distinguish submarine signatures from surface clutter at maximum range. Acoustic operators could identify individual U-boats by their distinctive propeller sounds, tracking specific boats across thousands of miles. Conversely, German submarine crews were becoming younger, less capable, and more terrified. The average age of U-boat commanders had dropped from 32 to 26. Veteran petty officers, who formed the backbone of submarine operations, were increasingly rare, their experience lost to the Atlantic. Boats sailed with crews who had never experienced combat, led by officers who had graduated from abbreviated training programs, often little more than boys themselves. Admiral Donitz's own son, Peter, exemplified this tragic trend. Serving aboard U-954 as a watch officer, he was lost with all hands on May 19, 1943, when his submarine was caught on the surface by British escorts. Even this personal tragedy did not deter Donitz from sending other young men to similar fates, but it underscored the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign. Spring 1944 brought new American innovations that made U-boat operations virtually suicidal. The introduction of centimetric radar on all hunter-killer aircraft eliminated the last sanctuary of darkness. Lee lights. Powerful searchlights carried by aircraft, turned night into day, illuminating surfaced submarines from miles away. Even the most experienced commanders could no longer evade detection. The ocean, once a vast hiding place, had become a transparent battlefield. The intensity of hunter-killer operations reached its peak with encounters that bordered on the surreal. On May 6, 1944, the USS Buckley, a destroyer escort, located U-60X on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. Oberleutnant Gerhard Seehausen, U-66's commander, was a veteran of 9 patrols, having sunk 33 ships. His extensive experience, however, counted for nothing against the forces arrayed against him. Unable to dive due to battery depletion and with no hope of escape, U-66 attempted a desperate final act, to ram the Buckley. The two vessels collided at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together in the darkness. German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range across the decks. The combat was frantic, a brutal close-quarters slugfest. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew on the Buckley poured fire into the U-boat. 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20 mm ammunition, and 418 rounds of 40 mm shells in just 16 minutes. U-66's hull was perforated in dozens of locations. The submarine sank, taking 24 of its 48 crew members with it. This hand-to-hand combat, this raw, desperate fight on the surface, represented the death throes of an era when submarines could operate as surface raiders. It was a testament to the utter transformation of the war at sea. Perhaps the ultimate demonstration of American dominance came on June 4, 1944, with the capture of U-505 by Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from the USS Guadalcanal. A boarding party from the destroyer escort USS Pillsbury descended through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still underway, seawater flooding through damaged valves. They closed the sea valves, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence value was immense. Code books, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals fell into American hands, providing an unprecedented insight into German U-boat capabilities and intentions. But the symbolic value was even greater. U-boats were no longer fearsome predators. They were prizes to be taken, their crews prisoners rather than warriors. The very notion of the U-boat as an uncatchable threat had been shattered. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought hunter-killer groups into the confined waters of the Bay of Biscay, hunting U-boats attempting to attack invasion shipping. The bay became a literal killing ground. 15 U-boats were destroyed in the first week of June alone. Survivors described attacks by dozens of aircraft simultaneously, making escape impossible. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war, vividly described the experience of facing hunter-killer groups. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear the splash of sonobuoys above us. Then the escorts would arrive, maintaining contact for days. We would surface, gasping for air, only to find aircraft already waiting. It was systematic extermination. By August 1944, Dönitz, faced with the advancing Allied armies, ordered the evacuation of French U-boat bases. U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced continuous attacks from hunter-killer groups positioned along their route. Of 31 boats that attempted the passage, 11 were destroyed. The survivors arrived with extensive damage and exhausted crews, their morale shattered. The Germans did introduce the Haschnorkel breathing tube. an innovation that allowed submarines to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth. This theoretically eliminated the need to surface to charge batteries. However, this innovation came too late and proved inadequate. Snorkel-equipped boats were still vulnerable to radar detection and could only make 6 knots while using the device, making them slow and cumbersome. It was a defensive adaptation, a last-ditch attempt to survive, not a return to offensive capability. The hunter-killer groups had won the race against German technical innovation through the sheer weight of numbers, systematic destruction, and continuous refinement of their methods. The final statistics told the complete, brutal story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1944, they sank just 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons. The hunter-killer groups had reduced German submarine effectiveness by a staggering 90%. At peak production, American shipyards launched over 140 Liberty ships per month, nearly 3 every 2 days, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. The tonnage war's arithmetic had become impossible for Germany. By March 1945, the U-boat force existed largely on paper. Of 463 boats nominally available, fewer than 60 were operational. Most remained in port, lacking fuel, torpedoes, or trained crews. Those that dared to sail faced certain destruction from hunter-killer groups that had perfected their craft through 2 years of continuous operations. The final humiliation came in April 1945 when U-546 attacked the USS Frederick C. Davis, part of USS Bogue's screen. The destroyer escort sank, but within hours, U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts. It was the last U-boat killed by Bogue's hunter-killer group, bringing her total to 13 submarines destroyed. Admiral Donitz's final war diary entry regarding submarine operations contained a bitter, yet remarkably clear admission. The enemy's superiority at sea, particularly in the field of science and technology, has torn from our hands the most effective weapon we possessed. The submarine war has ended in defeat. The transformation had taken less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats had nearly severed the Atlantic lifeline, sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was effectively extinct, its remnants cowering in ports or being methodically destroyed at sea. The hunter-killer groups had achieved this reversal through the systematic application of superior technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity. They had transformed submarine hunting from an art requiring intuition and luck into a science demanding precision and persistence. Every aspect of anti-submarine warfare had been optimized through operational research and practical refinement. The greatest shock for German U-boat captains was not merely the loss of tactical superiority, but the speed and completeness of its occurrence. In March 1943, wolf packs had nearly severed Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction, their bases under constant surveillance, their communications compromised, their every movement predicted and countered. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough, but through the systematic integration of multiple advantages. Radar that could detect submarines day or night, aircraft that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts, intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed, and industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was determined not by individual courage or skill, but by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield, where every movement was observed, every transmission intercepted, and every mistake punished with destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, contemplating the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage. I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extends far beyond their wartime achievements. They demonstrated that future naval warfare would be determined by the integration of air and surface forces, the fusion of intelligence with operations, and the application of scientific methodology to tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War, equipped with sophisticated sensors and weapons, were direct descendants of the concepts proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. The integration of advanced sonar, anti-submarine warfare helicopters, and interconnected intelligence networks in modern navies are all direct intellectual descendants of the hunter-killer doctrine. The very architecture of modern anti-submarine warfare was forged in the crucible of the Atlantic. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor, their steel hulls slowly dissolving into the abyss. They are not just monuments to lost lives, they are stark reminders of the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups, who transformed submarine hunting from a desperate defensive measure into an offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the war's outcome. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force, and, ultimately, through naval history itself. The German U-boat force entered 1943 as masters of the Atlantic, their wolf packs savaging convoys with near impunity. They ended it as hunted fugitives, their bases bombed, their supply lines severed, their experienced crews dead, and their remaining boats cowering in ports or fleeing from relentless pursuit. The shock of this reversal would resonate through naval history as the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity forever changed the nature of warfare at sea. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943-45 had shocked German U-boat captains not through superior seamanship or courage, qualities both sides possessed in abundance, but through the systematic application of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority that transformed the ocean from a sanctuary into a killing field where precision, not valor, determined survival. The final statistics were irrefutable. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats, killing 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine operating independently through stealth and cunning had ended. The future belonged to integrated naval forces employing sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic. They had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter. The ultimate lesson from the dramatic reversal in the Battle of the Atlantic is a profound one, echoing through military history to this very day. While individual bravery and tactical skill will always be important on the battlefield, they are ultimately insufficient to overcome a systemic, integrated advantage in technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity. The U-boat captains, courageous and dedicated as they were defeated by an adversary that embraced scientific analysis, fostered rapid technological innovation, and possessed the industrial might to deploy these advantages on an unprecedented scale. This era marked the undeniable shift in warfare from a test of individual prowess to a contest of integrated systems, a lesson that continues to shape global military strategy and technological development in the modern age.